So a while back, I had the honor of going on one of your guys' podcasts to discuss the topic of AI art. And as the episode was sort of ending, I asked the host, I said, you've discussed AI art so much. In specific, I believe he was doing a project on it. I don't think the podcast's anywhere on YouTube, unfortunately. But I asked him, you've studied this so much. Do you believe that AI art is art? And he said, I started this whole podcast with no, it's not, it can't be. But he says, time goes on, I kind of have to change that take from, I think it's not art, to, it's just really bad art. And I said, yeah, I agree. And it made me think back to a while ago when I was working on a video for the main channel about AI art. And there was kind of a lot of different angles I could take. One of them was talking about the whole art heist going on as far as companies are stealing art and using data. The other is about the effect this will have on the arts. And then the third, which is what I was most interested in, was, is this art? Can we call ChatGPT generated, Mid-Journey made images art? And the latter there, the whole question of is AI art, is the video I decided categorically I should not make because, one, I don't like my answer, because I unfortunately do think it is art by the pretenses of the definition, as much as I hate that fact. And two, I think it's more suited to this, a discussion about why I think AI art technically does have to be considered art and the implications of that question. First of all, the elephant in the room here, why do I call AI art art? Why is this, instead of calling it image generation technology or whatever, why am I calling it that? I think AI art is art because by the definition of art, it does technically fulfill the qualifications in a very minute way, right? So the definition of art that I go for is the Oxford definition of the expression or application of human creative skill or imagination. And the action, technically, the image that you get when you generate AI maybe isn't considered art, but the action of creating the image definitely is. When you prompt one of these AI bots, you are exercising the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination. You are imagining the image and using that imagination to prompt a bot to make a photo with it, right? And this is where I was like, okay, technically, due to one very small, minute part, literally if that didn't happen, the actual creation itself of the image is technically not art, but the prompting is, right? So this is like the weird thing where on a technicality, this is art. Maybe, and this is what I've heard a lot of people in the space talk about, you get those guys on your feed sometimes that are like, AI image generation is the future. Let me teach you the art of prompting. And they've learned like exactly how to prompt one of the AIs to be, to get what they want. I hate to admit those guys are technically right? Because like, it is an art to understand how to play within these rules and come up with a creation and have better control over it. In a similar way, and if you guys are photographers, you're gonna hate this example, but in a similar way to the way that when the camera first came out, all the portrait artists were going, this is not art, because all you're doing is pressing a button. And obviously a photographer would respond to that going, no, the art actually comes in the action of playing around with exactly how you're going to manipulate the space you're in and everything around the pressing of the button to get the image that you desire. An AI artist, as much as I hate to use that term, would say, technically this is art, not because of the image itself, but because you're playing around with all the elements around it in order to get the desired byproduct from this piece of technology. Now, I have a couple temptations when I come to this conclusion, one of which is to say this is either, this has two ways you can go from here. A, just grapple with the fact that AI art is art, figure out what you want to do with that conclusion, where do you go from there? B, change the definition of art, because AI art, AI generated images is, this whole category is so far and away from what we know to be art that I think it warrants the fact, it is showing us a glaring hole in our definition of art as it exists. I don't know how I feel about either of these options, right? Because on the one hand, the definition of art's solid, you know, because it's broad. And if you look at the way that, the reason I love the definition of art, along with my love of modern art, is just because of how much it's stretched what art can be. In a way, and this is an argument I know people are going to make, it's the most rebelliously artistic thing to do to make art with AI, because it's evoking a reaction. It's starting a conversation about what art is in a similar way to the fact that putting a bucket in the middle of a white room is provoking a conversation about what it means to create something. AI is doing the same thing. And the definition of art, in my experience working with it, making all these videos and doing all these projects in regards to it, it's worked always so well. I mean, it's a rock solid definition because art is a really broad thing. The guy putting a bucket in the middle of the gallery is art. I think it's also interesting because a lot of the people who want to look at AI art and go, this isn't art, are doing it from the lens of, no, there's a line to be drawn, this act of creation is not as valid as the other ones. And that's the same argument that people use looking at the Bucket Museum, going, this technically isn't art. So, this is all to say that the only reason I would change the definition of art is because I have an emotional reaction that is so angry to AI art that I go, no, everything we've ever known before is wrong because I hate this thing so much. I'd love to come here and, you know, I think that's a very popular take to have, I guess. I think a lot of people would look at that and go, yeah, he's right, this is an artist fighting back right now, you know. Everybody's doing it on Twitter, but I think it's a little bit dishonest for me to come here and say that, because no, the definition of art isn't wrong. AI art just is art in a different way that is kind of annoying, unfortunately. Now, I think from there, you gotta kind of, the solution I take is to grapple with this then, right? So like, we know that AI art is in some regard art. How do we take that? Where do we go from there, right? I think a valid response would be a lot of people who maybe are in the pro AI art camp. I knew that was gonna happen eventually. It's kind of a tongue twister. I think a lot of the people who are in that camp, their reaction would be to go, no, you don't have to grapple with it. You have explained that it's art, and like that, like fair game. You gotta, that's the conclusion. There's your headline. You gotta print it, you know what I mean? And I think they might be right on just like on a argument of pure semantics, of pure logic, of looking at the definition of art and going like, what do we do with this? I don't think they're technically wrong that like, yeah, you kind of gotta look at AI art and go, technically, because of the prompting aspect of AI art, looking at this, they're not wrong, I guess, but I also do think there's an aspect in which I disagree with that camp of people, because, I mean, looking at AI art, it's just not the same, right? I can't, in any reality, and this has been a long-term issue. There's not going to be an answer coming in this Paint and Talk. If you guys are expecting me here to come to a nice, tidy conclusion at the end of this, that's not happening today. I definitely don't have any sort of conclusion on this, because this is a problem I've been grappling with forever. How do I look at somebody prompting an AI to make a picture, and then take a look at somebody pouring everything into a piece of art, and having end-to-end control over every aspect of it, and go, both these exist in the same category, right? The answer I've kind of tentatively used over the years, because this has been a long-term problem, as I said, is that I've come to the conclusion that art is not a special status. That art is more so just kind of a thing, it happens, some of it's great and beautiful and we hold it in high esteem, but art just as a concept is not something that we can look at and go, yeah, this is a beautiful, special thing. That's the only conclusion I've had that makes sense. The other conclusion that I've always toyed with, but has always felt a little bit weird to me, is to kind of come up with a spectrum of more art to less art. This is kind of also how we unconsciously treat this conversation, I think. Because a lot of people, when they're talking about art, do this already. They go like, no, the person who put more time in, the person who comes with more skill, or has a broader, more specific idea, is the person with the better art, right? We have a tendency to do that, and I don't think that's inherently wrong, actually. I think that's a pretty good way to go, but that also involves some implications in there that aren't great. Like, for an example, going back to this whole thing of the bucket in the museum, that would theoretically be less art because it's more simple, right? And this also has the other implication of the more complicated piece, the better a piece. We all know that's not true. There are some really simple pieces of art that are truly amazing, and there are some really complicated pieces of art that are just like, they don't do much, you know? There's another angle you could take here of the more emotion a piece has, the better it is. Again, solid angle, I think this makes sense, but that's something that's impossible to measure. The only reason that argument would exist is to make AI art less art. And I don't like that. I think this is why I think this conversation's so difficult, and why I'm probably gonna say that I unfortunately do think AI art is art in the title of this video, because every argument against this has to exist purely out of spite for this new form of image generation technology. That's the hard part about this, is that if I'm to take the emotion argument, if I'm to take the skill argument, if I'm to take the intention argument, I have to look at this and go, I have this new lens of looking at all art that exists just to spite this one form of art. And I don't like that. Another argument you could use is similar to the one that I kind of came up with the other day, where it was like, we can judge art in terms of intention, using the theological argument of like God, bad things happen because of an absence of God's goodness. Bad art happens because of an absence of the creator's intent and like specific skill, right? This works for AI art, actually. I think this argument does work for AI art without having huge implications on everything else, right? Because it says AI art is not inherently bad, it's only bad because it gives the creator the least control they'll ever have in any medium, and because of that, its byproducts are always going to be bad. I think this also leaves room for good AI art, which will come along. I think that people are dismissing this a ton because of the reaction to it. I think there will come along people who are like truly geniuses at prompting AI and will be able to sit there for a whole day just slightly tweaking everything until they've used this technology to curate a piece. And in that way, as much as people are gonna hate this, I do think someday we will look at AI similar to Photoshop, in terms of like, you are going to take pre-existing things, and it is a skill to curate these things in this program. I don't like the intent argument though, because once again, it's too easily disproven in my opinion. There are great art pieces that people have looked at and gone, I didn't mean to do that. This was an accident. Bob Ross is like most famous thing is going, it's a happy accident. I know in this series alone, some of the things that you guys have like commented and DM me being like, this painting was awesome, this was my favorite thing to ever happen. Completely accidental. And either I dismiss all of that, once again, just in a way to spite AI art, or I have to just go, AI art is by definition technically art. In my opinion, I don't like it. That's the thing, is like, people are always looking for ways to intellectualize their opinions. I mean, you guys have probably seen me do it a ton on the series where I'm just coping with my own opinion by trying to intellectualize it, right? It's okay though to go, under all the parameters we have, that we do have to refer to this as art. That doesn't mean I like it though. That is technically okay. So I think that's kind of the conclusion I have to come to. I'd love to hear if you guys could come up with a better, more bulletproof argument of why AI art isn't art. I think the best angle is that just the act of prompting is art. The image ultimately cannot be called art because it's not made by a human, but it's made with the input of human imagination. So that's where it's like, you could separate the two, and I think that technicality can be made, but then again, that means that only the part where you set up the photo would be the art, not the actual final product of the photo itself, because a camera made it, not a human. So that's another thing where you're taking an argument just because you don't like AI art, that's gonna have implications on all this other stuff. So this is where I'm left with. I'd love to see if you guys have a bulletproof argument for this. This is today's painting. I want to kind of combine the super thick and heavy lay-on of the paint from yesterday's painting with the eyes from the day before, and man, this is visceral. I mean, like, I don't know if I'll call it good, but I do find this to be... I don't find this to be a dull painting at all. Again, I don't know if I can call it a good painting, but definitely it's interesting. I think, yeah. It has a weird uncanny valley effect to it, which is what I was going for. Or at least that's how I'm seeing it. I don't know. It's interesting, though. I got to think about this one. Go check the Instagram. It's my final write-up on today's painting. And until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Zeiss. This has been Paint and Talk episode 128. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.